Canada is hitting a turning point, and if this continues at its current rate, I am not sure how we're ever going to bounce back from it. We could be in for absolutely decades of pain. Canadians are fleeing Canada at an alarming rate, and we are seeing potential breakdown of social cohesion that will lead to civil unrest like we've never seen before in the history of Canada. And things could get so dire that Canada absolutely plummets as a nation that people want to come to. There are so many changes and trends happening right now. We are going to talk about a bunch of them today. I don't just want to terrify you. We'll talk about some solutions. The Nomad Capitalist put out an amazing video. He brought up some very important things. I actually think this is very serious, guys. Let's get into it.
People are fleeing Canada at a faster rate than ever before. Conservatives say it's almost a decade of Justin Trudeau's rule making the country worse. But whatever the reason may be, people are fed up in Canada. It's harder than ever to live in Canada, and you've never gotten less value for your high taxes in Canada. Today, I'm going to tell you the stories of people who are leaving and why. These are the reasons why people are leaving Canada in droves. That's the headline in Hong Kong's South China Morning Post. For decades, Hong Kongers moved to Canada in search of greater freedom. They're now realizing, just as many folks I've met over the years have, that that deal hasn't really panned out. They don't have the benefits anymore that they thought they would get by moving to Canada. People who moved to the United States from places like Eastern Europe have also told me, you know, I'd rather go back to Bulgaria. I'd rather go back to Serbia. I'd rather go back to Poland now. There's more opportunities there.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We're seeing, I'm having conversations with immigrants. Like sometimes people DM me on Instagram and I'm seeing this change in tone that we've never seen before. Like Canada, the US, all of these places used to be such desired nations. And the thing about Canada in particular is, like he said, your taxes used to mean you got the services. It used to mean you get the healthcare. It used to mean all of these things. People always complained about taxes, as they always will. But now more than ever, obviously, Axe the Tax, got to plug that. But now more than ever, it's so important to realize that this taxation is actually leading to our destruction and we get nothing for it. It's very important for us to pay attention to these trends.
We're seeing that in countries all around the world, people going back to where they're from because where they're from got better and the place they moved to, like the US or Canada, got worse. But the South China Morning Post says, enticed by Canada's global image, many immigrants are finding realities on the ground different. Here's what really stings. A clip by a YouTuber explaining why he is leaving Canada went viral recently. Canada is a 3-star hotel charging 5-star rates. That is exactly the definition that we've told you for years. That's the perfect way to say it. We call countries like Canada a legacy brand country. I drink Coca-Cola. When I go to the store and I see the RC Cola or Bob's Cola or the new cola, or in Malaysia they have the Salt Cola, I'm like, I don't know what these other colas are like. I'm just going to stick with the one I know. And that's why immigrants move to countries like Canada and the US. I live in places like Malaysia, and you see that people are also moving to Malaysia. People are moving to all sorts of countries that you don't think about. But the ones that get talked about the most are the legacy brand Western countries that are like Coca-Cola, still living off of fame that they built, marketing campaigns they built all over the years.
And the funny thing is, when you ask the immigrants who are looking at coming to Canada and all these things, they think of the 1980s and 90s stereotypes of Canada of like, oh, what's going on there, you hoser? Like all those like classic, like, oh, Canadians, they're so polite and they're great neighbors and all of these things. Like, does Canada look like that anymore? I don't know. Like, are those the Canadians you're meeting? Whoa.
And listen, a name brand can charge a higher price. That's why when I go to far-flung places, the Intercontinental might be 2 or 3 times the price of a similar quality local hotel that me, as someone who's not from that country, I don't know that brand. Is it worth taking a chance? I don't know. Just stay at the name brand Western hotel. And as a result, these legacy brand countries are not providing 5-star services anymore. They shut down the pool, they shut down the sauna, they shut down the massage, and they have only one person manning the check-in desk, but they're still charging the 5-star prices. They've become a 3-star hotel at 5-star rates. They're living off of the brand the same way if you go. I was just in Cairo, Egypt, for example. You go to Old Cairo. They have some nice hotels that are just a little dated, and they have some that have kind of, they're not so good anymore, but Westerners are going and they're sold out because they have the brand. Now, according to the South China Morning Post, this gentleman is being charitable. A secret report by the RCMP, the Canadian equivalent of the FBI, warns the country may descend into civil unrest once citizens realize their bleak prospects.
And that's true because I don't know about you guys, but I'm having so many discussions with people these days. A lot of them would have considered themselves classical liberals or even just like, progressives and very liberal. And they're finally waking up that their lives are not going to look like the way they thought they were in Canada. The opportunity is not here the way it once was. I mean, even as recent as 10 years ago, I've told this story a couple times. I got a triplex in Welland, Ontario for $190,000. Triplex, 3 units, $190,000. That's opportunity. That's potential. That's affordable. Now, for $190,000, that's a down payment on a triplex, and you got this massive mortgage, and not even including houses and these other things. So when people start waking up to what's happening with our money system and the immigration system and how the taxes are just literally being set on fire, I don't know how they're going to react. It's going to be hard to actually predict. I'm not going to make any predictions, but the conversations I hear.
So we've got 2 main points right out of the gate. 3-star hotel charging 5-star prices. You're not getting your money's worth. People are telling you, don't you want to pay your taxes? Well, you're paying a boatload of taxes in Canada, and you're not getting your money's worth. But also, what happens when people realize they've been duped? What happens when the folks who don't watch Nomad Capitalist, don't travel the world, don't realize that Malaysia is just as safe, if not more safe? Most of the countries we talk about are just as safe, if not more safe, than a place like Canada or the US. What happens when they realize they're paying a fortune in terms of just the price of goods themselves due to all the regulations and labor costs and all that, but also they're paying a lot of money in tax. They're getting crappy weather in case of Canada. They're having less and less personal freedom. And they realize, hey, this is just a shiny marketing campaign. I've bought into a shiny object because I didn't know any better. Hey, all I knew was Coca-Cola. Maybe Bob's Cola tastes better, but hey, I didn't want to gamble. Will the country descend into civil unrest? That's not the work of some guy like myself trying to gin up fear. That's what apparently the actual Royal Canadian Mounted Police is saying.
Yeah, and that article came out a couple months ago, but we saw so many people talking about it at the time because it's so scary to think that, the RCMP is basically bracing themselves for this. And it's because our underlying economic fundamentals are plummeting. The thing, I had a discussion with a friend recently. We do have a bit of a get out of jail free card in Canada, which is our natural resource sector. It is not being utilized. Like, basically, it's like we've got this Ford F-150 full pickup truck, and we're using it to tow residential lawnmowers when, it could be towing so much more. And some truck guy out there is going to be like, oh, you're talking about 250? I don't know, man. I'm not a truck guy. We're using an overpowered truck to tow things that are very small. And then the problem is, it's all this wasted potential. So we have that. So hopefully that would be something that we could lean on, but we will need powerful leadership for that. And everybody who's out there right now, you guys know I'm even skeptical of PP. Obviously, I think he's better than Trudeau. Trudeau is the worst thing, and I'm confident in saying this now. Trudeau is probably the worst thing to happen to Canada in the history of Canada as far as a government leadership perspective, because he is running us into a ground. He's speed running us into the ground. And is Pierre a strong enough leader to be the guy to help us that much? He's better than Trudeau. Obviously, we want him to win in this situation, but is he a strong enough leader to help with the devastating damage that's being done?
And that's what we've been telling you for years. I'm not a guy saying there's chaos coming in the streets. I never want to be an extreme prophesier of doom and gloom and there's total chaos coming and get out today, you'll be dead tomorrow. That's not what we talk about here. But when indeed people realize, hey, this country isn't what I thought it was, I'm getting duped, yeah, people are going to be upset. And we have read article after article after article about potential civil unrest. You see where I'm from in the United States, people are at each other's throats. I haven't been there in a long, long time. But people tell me it is worse than ever. And so this is basically, you're sitting on a powder keg. The
Something quickly. Whenever they do talk about, people are at each other's throats, things are worse than ever. The left 10% and the right 10%, so 20% of the population, are just absolutely at each other's throats. They can't stand each other. They're fighting each other at protests and doing all these things. Okay, that's true. There's a massive group in the middle who's going, I just want to live my life, guys.
coming period of recession, here's back to the article. The coming period of recession will accelerate the decline in living standards that younger generations have already witnessed compared to earlier generations, said the heavily redacted report. This is a government report, which was obtained by a law professor through a Freedom of Information filing. However bad it is now, it warns that Canada's situation is likely to deteriorate in the next 5 years. So sit and think about that. People often tell me, Andrew, that I like what you talk about, but I'll leave when things get bad enough. Now, I look at when I started to follow politics, when I was a teenager, late 90s, 2000, 2001, I started reading a lot about this stuff. And if I think of all the stuff that I've read since then, if you don't think things have gotten bad enough in the last, 20 to 25 years, I don't know what to say to that. But if you think they're not going to get bad enough still, well, the report from the Canadian government says Canada's situation is likely to deteriorate in the next 5 years. Now, is a law enforcement agency going to take political sides? I'll let you, opine on that. But you could say, as people do, if only we get rid of Trudeau and his party, then it'll be a panacea again. First of all, until it won't be. Voters in legacy brain countries are notoriously fickle, and you never understand. Like, who are those undecided voters who, like in October before the November election in the U.S., I don't know, Trump or Biden? I'm undecided.
Yeah, so that's another thing. Be careful what you wish for, because I see a lot of you guys in my comments, we need a crash, real estate has to crash, housing needs to come down. As much as it does need to become more affordable to Canadians, if the real estate market crashes, everybody loses. Every single person loses. And guess who's going to buy up the cheaper real estate when that happens? Probably the big companies. So the cost and the standard of living is not going to get better for the lower income people who thought they were going to get into the market. The crash is going to happen. They're going to lose their jobs. And then the big companies are going to come in. They have money. They have lending. They're going to be able to buy up all this stuff. So a crash and economic woes is not what you want. That's a bad thing. So people saying that in the comments, just remember, crash is not good, even though it seems like it would be, because it would make real estate cheaper.
Like, if you're undecided in an election in a place like the US or Canada with the kind of candidates that are out there, I also don't know what to do to help you, but that's a percentage of the population, which is why you flip-flop. You have one party now, you go back and forth. So even if you think that your guys are going to fix it, your guys aren't going to be in power forever. And as things kind of systematically decline, some of that stuff can't be reversed. I grew up talking to my father about some of the European countries where even the right-wing parties, like, they can only do so much. And it just kind of drifts in the wrong direction.
Yep, and even though, again, I am very critical of Pierre, and when he gets in, I am going to hold him to account of the things that he has said. That being said, we do need to be gracious, because we know how much damage Trudeau has done is going to take a decade or more to clean up. So I'm going to be strict on Pierre, but not for him not immediately fixing the economics of what's going on.
But the reality is, you're not going to cut your taxes by very much. I mean, Donald Trump got elected, or George W. Bush got elected. Your taxes dropped by a small sliver, barely moved the needle. In terms of personal income taxes, for example. I mean, there's just certain institutions that are going to be upheld once they're in place. So over the next 5 years, things are going to get worse. I would happen to say that to some extent that's going to take place no matter who's in charge. Law enforcement, this is the quote again, should expect continuing and political polarization fueled by misinformation campaigns and increasing mistrust for all democratic institutions. Maybe there should be some distrust. When things were going well, people put their faith in the democratic institutions. People were fat and happy, and that's what bred all this talk of, why would I want to go to a third world country, like Malaysia? Oh, tut, how tough it is for them over there. I will stay in Canada. Everything's so great. Yeah, things worked out for a while until it didn't. And now people have a distrust of the institutions. Yeah, when people can move to a place like Dubai or somewhere else in the Gulf, you're seeing bigger efforts by even Saudi Arabia to attract not only tourists but permanent residents. They've got a residence program there. And you say, hey, these countries.
All right. Well, before we start talking about Saudi Arabia and their slave labor and all this stuff that's going on, just remember, obviously, part of this guy's business, the same way that I shout out my real estate business as being a real estate agent, he is a salesperson for his company that helps people get second passports. Worth remembering because we always have to contextualize everything that's going on. That being said, I don't personally think he's wrong here. That you're seeing this people switch their minds going, well, I mean, I've got no faith in the democratic institutions as they were. It was easy to believe in them when everybody's making money's free, basically everybody's making money and the institutions are working because you look at it like a Ferrari is an amazing car if you're driving in a straight line and you don't hit any dirt or stones or like no rough road at all, and you don't have to worry about reliability because notoriously those things will not turn on out of nowhere because it's just like these fine, like very perfect luxury machines. And that's the way that the West has kind of been operating. Like, no, look, we're Ferraris, guys, we're so good. And it's like, yeah, but there's rocks ahead. What is this Ferrari going to do? That's kind of the position we're in, because now the Ferrari's aging, things are falling apart, and our mechanics have been kind of just drunk for the last 10 years.
Countries are monarchies, not like the King of England, but like real monarchies. Is there something to this? Like, have we been scammed, like democracy? And here's what I've been telling you for years. The countries that we talk about and the places that I often spend my time are places that have come up over those last 25 years when you were quietly, one at a time, losing your freedoms, losing your buying power. And so we have, 80 some people who work in our company. Not one of them is in the United States. Not one of them is in Canada. There's a number of reasons for that.
Cheap labor,
but
probably.
we're just a very small part of a greater trend of people realizing that there's deals to be had somewhere else. I own property in numerous places. None of it is in the United States.
Oh, nothing.
In all
No.
fairness, I do own a couple REITs that I do believe have some U.S. real estate exposure, but no real estate that I own in my name is in the United States. The bottom line is when I travel around the world, people are making investments, they're hiring, they're building companies, they're doing business all over the world. A lot more people have figured out you can cut the U.S., you can cut Canada, you can cut Australia, you can cut all the legacy brands out of the picture. And so people in a country like Canada who thought that their politicians were doing a great job by making them among the wealthiest people in the world, now realize it kind of happened by default. It's what I've talked about at our annual event, Nomad Capitalist Live. I've been on the stage and I've shown a graph of the biggest economies in the world. Spain is one of the biggest economies in the world. There's not a lot of innovative stuff. There's not a lot of gung-ho, let's get to work and roll up our shirt sleeves and create something. Not a lot of that in Spain. God love it. You want to go there and live there for the lifestyle. We're going to be talking at the event this year.
So again, something that I also want to point out, like when they always say, oh, look at Bulgaria, you can go to Bulgaria and build a better life than you can here. Assuming the average Bulgarian is just trying to get a regular job, they are not going to have the same experience as somebody who has USD or Canadian dollars and has a US salary or Canadian salary, who's moving to Bulgaria to live there with their resources they've already built in the West, and they're bringing it over to those countries and going, well, yeah, you can buy a house for $20,000. I have $100,000 saved. Yeah, well, then you're in an awesome position. But how do you get that initial $100,000 when you're in Bulgaria? That's always the argument that I always have with these people. It's like
about some of the tax incentives that people don't know that much about in Spain. But as a place to like go and create the next innovative business, no, you wouldn't do that in Spain. And so Spain's economy being one of the largest in the world, to me, is a matter of default. Once the Indonesias and the Nigerias and, in a more developed aspect, the Malaysias and the Brazils and the Mexicos, once they got their act together and started growing, they're going to start taking over because they have greater population. It's more open to go to, all that. And that's why, again, I was just in Cairo. There's people who have money moving back to Cairo. That's not the best example. People moving back to Indonesia that I've met, people moving back to all kinds of places, Eastern Europe for sure, Colombia.
Eastern Europe for sure. I'm just laughing at the way you said Colombia there. The thing about Africa and why I'm always so skeptical about Africa is the corruption there is just so rampant. Obviously, ours is brutal, but in Africa, they just can't seem to get things going.
Salvador, Mexico. So the distrust people have in Canada, the U.S., and others, I think, is warranted. The article then asks, time to leave? More people are indeed leaving. And here's a clip from a YouTuber that I found who explains why she's leaving. She's an immigrant, the only source of population growth in Canada.
The main reason why we're leaving Canada after living here for 6 years is mainly because it's not worth it anymore for us to be away from our family and not being able to visit them as often as we would want to, because of the high cost of living and everything else around. When we moved here, it was extremely painful for our parents. I know it was, even though they were excited for us and were very supportive, but it was very painful for them to accept the fact that their kid is moving away pretty much forever and they will only be seeing them maybe once a year, maybe twice a year max.
So she speaks perfect English. You wouldn't even tell she's not Canadian. She's an extremely talented person, it seems. She has a highly paid job. She's not going to mooch off the system. She is what Canada is banking on to continue to grow its country, because the replacement numbers by births in places like Canada, the US, and much of the Western world are just not there. So
I agree with that. What's never addressed is the reason it's not there is because our cost of living keeps getting worse through mass immigration and these other things. So obviously, as immigration is to decline, ironically, birth rates actually statistically start to increase as standard of living falls. So as we end up in more of an economic depression, as we end up in more of a crash, statistically birth rates increase, which means we would need less immigration. We would be able to build as a country. Interesting and worth noting.
So if Canada or any of these other countries are no longer appealing to people with talent to come and pay taxes into, then what happens next? You're kind of screwed. What's something else that we've been talking about? I wrote an article on nomadcapitalist.com probably 6 or 7 years ago at this point. Serbia's passport was the big growth story of the 2010s. Obviously, you have countries that have joined the European Union, like Bulgaria, Croatia, etc. Their passports have now become really top tier. They don't need to get a Canadian passport. You know, Serbians, just as an example, they need a visa to go to the US or Canada or Australia, but to travel to most other places in the world, they don't. That wasn't the case not that long ago. You look at passports in places like Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, Latin America, they've gotten incredibly better. We mentioned in our Live Like a King video, where when we were in Bogota, we were talking about how the Colombian passport in 2015 got access to visit Europe, the Schengen area. More recently, got access to visit the United Kingdom. So if you're a Colombian, you need a visa to go to the US, and I have friends in Colombia who have that visa. I think to Canada as well. I think to Australia. Those are like some of the toughest countries to get into. But you can go pretty much everywhere else in the world. You need a visa to come to Malaysia, Nomad Capitalist Live. But these passports have gotten pretty good. So even the angle of, hey, I know the country's not that great. I know I'm going to pay a fortune. The weather stinks. Everything's going to pot. But hey, I'll get that top tier Canadian passport. Even that's not going to save a country like Canada anymore. People are realizing they have more options. So the immigrants who are supposed to move there, I'm not talking about, you know, all the illegal immigration that people in especially the US complain about in their country. That's a different topic. I'm talking about talented immigration. If those people
Yeah, so before we get into the next point, it's worth noting, I actually went to Serbia. I actually thought it was beautiful. Everybody there was nice. The food was amazing. The buildings look great. My friend did get beat up in the bathroom by some strangers, so you know, it's not always perfect, but I did overall enjoy my time while I was there. And maybe he has a different experience. But the point is, I do agree that as these passports become more powerful and it becomes less desirable to come to Canada, you know, why are they going to want to come? And we're going to be losing more of the educated and the productive immigrants. And as he's going to get into, we're going to end up with more of the illegal immigrants who are net negative. Okay. They absolutely suck resources dry out of Canada and the West when they come over illegally.
Start going to Dubai, if those people start going to Singapore, if they start going to one of the more friendly countries in Europe, I mean, Ireland has attracted a lot of people. If they start going to those places, What's a legacy brand country to do?
I've actually been kind of looking at Ireland. Like, if I was to leave Canada, it's one of the options that I kind of like. That being said, they're actually dealing with a lot of similar problems that we are with Canada and the United States, but they have a history of rebellion and they have a strong cultural tie there. They have a lot more social cohesion, so they're probably going to push back way before we do in the West.
And so more people are leaving. In the first 6 months of last year, 42,000 people left Canada. That's the equivalent of close to 400,000 people leaving the United States. That's not a small number in Canada. For the full year of 2022 and 2021, the numbers were almost 94,000 and almost 86,000. Canada has an annual immigrant acceptance of roughly 500,000, but not all of them show up. And so in recent years, for every 5 people coming in, 1 leaves, on top of the fact that Canadian.
We know that number's wrong. We got 1.3 million in 2023. So the 500,000 is like the goal. And yes, not everybody shows up and some people leave quickly, but we're getting a lot, bud.
They're not going to be able to, for the rest of this century, replace themselves. And so the cracks are starting to show in a big way. Not replacing yourselves. Immigrants decreasingly want to come, particularly talented immigrants. Just the deal isn't there.
That's the
and I think that the stuff we've told you about for years are part of the reasons. There are other places that
I've said it before, like India has people, 1.4 or 1.6 billion people, however many they have. They've got hundreds of millions of people who live in feces, in mud huts with no power and electricity. I think they would still risk coming to Canada. That being said, are those the productive ones? No, we want the productive immigrants who are highly skilled and in demand.
The Canadian who might not have traveled very much don't realize that someone, from Bulgaria or Moldova or somewhere else, they'd rather go there. There are so many options, and just because you don't see them in Canada or the UK or the US when you turn on your news, which doesn't talk about those countries unless there's a problem there, just because you don't see them doesn't mean the person who wants a better life and wants to move somewhere doesn't see them. That's going to have a big impact. And so you're also going to see more natural-born Canadians leaving because they realize the deal's not there. You see the lowest levels of patriotism, particularly in the US from Gen Z. The ones that do want to stick around are the ones that want to put a camera in your living room because we can't have domestic violence, privacy be damned. So
I don't even know what that reference is to, so I'll just let him have it.
So at the very least, you want to have a plan B. And I had a Canadian friend of mine recently reach out. He is one of the last people I would ever thought would ask, hey, I think I want to get a second passport. And it included, hey, I'm Jewish, and I think
then he probably has a second passport already.
That could be a risk going forward. And I think more Canadians realize that. We help people here create plan Bs. That could be get a second passport, you've got a place to go. If there is going to be chaos, if there are going to be riots, if there will be the civil unrest that I'm not predicting, the RCMP's secret report apparently is predicting.
Pretty convenient.
If you're afraid of that, you might want another place to go. You might not want to rely on being let in as a tourist. I think Canadians will continue to be welcome. Let's not go extremely doom and gloom. But where can you go and make sure you can stay? Because here's what most North Americans don't realize. You can't just go to Europe and stay forever. There's limits on how long you can stay in each country and their visa policy. At the very least, get a residence.
And you need to have incomes and ways to support yourself and all these things. Like, obviously, you can't just go to Europe and be like, well, I escaped Canada. Like, there's logistics.
Residence permit, hopefully one that can become citizenship in the future. All the better, get a second citizenship through your ancestry by making an investment. We help people do that in dozens of different countries. And potentially, if you say, okay, well, if this bad stuff's going to come in the next 5 years, why the hell am I paying almost half of my income in taxes at a time when Justin Trudeau is raising my taxes? Why am I paying that? To watch the place go down the tubes? Well, that's a plan A. Move now. We've helped people move to also dozens of tax-friendly countries.
The Nomad Capitalist brought up a ton of good points here today. Obviously, they are salespeople selling their business too, so do be mindful of that. But thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate if you've made it this far. You absolutely rock. Do not forget to like and subscribe. Grab a shirt. I'm a real estate agent in London, Ontario. Have a great rest of your day.